the eye and the brain. Said the eye to the brain, I'm brighter than you are. I have a big window that lets in the light. If my jokes are cornier, it's my aqueous humour, and my rods will see me through any dark night. Said the brain to the eye, don't flatter yourself. It isn't what but who that you know. You would be nowhere without me to help. My connections help you to go with the flow. Said the eye to the brain, that's all very well, but I can watch Netflix in dazzling 3D, with a screen that stretches 180 degrees and 10 million colours that answer to me. Said the brain to the eye, you're not making sense. That scene you describe plays in my head. I stream movies round the clock at no expense, and even at night when you go to bed. Said the eye to the brain, that may be the case, but coordination's my specialty. Without me you'd struggle to move on in space, and you've been running since before you were 3. Said the brain to the eye, you've got it all wrong. You can't wiggle your toes with no message from me. You've got quite a nerve to claim to be strong when I do the hard work behind all the scenes. Said the eye to the brain, just consider the facts. Without me, the world that you know wouldn't be. I feed you each second with data you lack, and most of the knowledge you have comes from me. Said the brain to the eye, but in my defence, if I didn't put your jigsaw together, the pictures would never make any sense, and I'm certain no piece of it you would remember. Said the eye to the brain, don't make me laugh. Without me your world would be dull, drab and dark. No colourful pictures of bees and giraffes, nothing to cheer you, not even a spark. Said the brain to the eye, don't be absurd. I invent and create and make up what I like. For instance, I once made a whirligig bird, propelled by a blade that stood up on a spike. Said the eye to the brain, I can read people's faces. I know who they are, I can tell how they feel. It's a talent I've used in all kinds of places. It makes me attractive, it gives me appeal. Said the brain to the eye, your words have no basis. It's me who keeps track of the people you know. It's my job to store all those feelings and faces. Without my help you can't tell Billy from Joe. We'll have to conclude, said the eye to the brain. You rely more on me than I do on you. If I were not here you'd be all that remained, and I doubt that you see as much as you do. I'm sorry, old chap, said the brain to the eye. One solitary people won't go very far. You'd never survive without all I provide. And that's my last word. And so, au revoir. That's a little poem I put together. just make us think about the different ways that the visual system and the brain and the eye work together. And it's not really a good idea to try and pit one against the other. But have a think for a moment about the brain. We're going to be looking at the brain today and doing a little bit of an exploration session on its structure, its function. The brain is often compared to a computer. In fact, one of the burning issues of the time is artificial intelligence and trying to make a computer that is like a brain. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but people compare the brain to a computer and they talk about inputs and outputs. Both process information. The brain and the computer, they both handle information, but they do it in very different ways. A computer is digital and works using ones and zeros. And everything, remarkably, that you see on your computer is just a combination of digits. The brain, on the other hand, is completely analog. Both have memory. The brain has a memory and the computer has a memory. Computer memory you can just take out and you can move it to somewhere else and store it on all sorts of in all sorts of media. The brain, on the other hand, has memory stored in the temporal lobes, and the way it stores and the way it retrieves information is completely different from a computer. The brain uses electrical signals to communicate between neurons, and computers use electricity to power their circuits. But there are more differences than there are similarities. For example, the brain is capable of parallel processing, meaning it can perform multiple tasks simultaneously, whereas computers typically can perform tasks only one at a time in a sequential way. Also, the brain uses a network of neurons to process and store information. Computers use digital circuits and software algorithms. Creativity is a major difference. The brain is capable of being creative. A computer operates only on instructions that you give it. A brain has the ability to learn from experience and adapt, whereas computers can only learn from the data they're programmed with. And then there are physical limitations. Computers are constrained by their hardware limitations, whereas the brain can continue to learn and adapt as long as it remains healthy. I want to introduce you to my head. This is Head. Hello, Head. Probably easier if I talk about my head rather than my head. So, the brain. Where is the brain? Well, first of all, the brain's inside the skull. If you go underneath the skull, if you took this top off, you would find, well, you won't actually find inside head, but you would find in a human head, you would find something called the cerebral cortex. And the cortex is the outer surface, and it consists of grey matter, which are the cell bodies, which contain all the information, and then underneath that is the white matter, which consists of the connections or the axons. And these are all the connections that go from cell to cell. The whole of that area is called the cerebrum, and basically the cerebrum fills most of the skull, and it's divided up into 4 big sections, and the sections are what concerns us today. Okay, it's a very complex thing, the brain. It consists of 100 billion neurons, and it's the most complex thing in the universe. But I'm going to simplify it incredibly today. So I just want to talk about the four main sections of the brain which will concern us ongoing. These are called lobes, and there are lobes either side. They're paired either side of the brain, and they're divided in the middle as the corpus callosum, which connects the two together. So first of all then, I'll just mention what they are. You've got the front. Behind this front temple, you have the frontal cortex, you have the prefrontal cortex, and then the whole of the frontal cortex, which includes the motor cortex. Then at the top, you have the parietal cortex, or the parietal lobes. Then at the sides, you have the temporal lobes, and then turning head around, right at the back of the cerebrum, back of the brain, you have the visual cortex, which is called the occipital lobes. Okay, so you got the frontal lobes, and particularly the prefrontal lobe. You've got the parietal lobes, and you've got the temporal lobes, and you've got the occipital lobes. Right, now those 4 sections are basically how we interpret the world around us. And I'm going to just say a few very brief things about each of them and what they do. I'll start with the back, because it's always good to start from the back and then work forwards. So right at the back we have the occipital lobes, the visual cortex, and in sort of medical language they're named with V1, V2, V3 and so on. V standing for vision, which is strange, but anyway. So you've got the visual cortex, and in the visual cortex, each of these little sections, these V sections, handle different things. So the main vision area is the occipital cortex. So from the eyes, you've got nerves that go right back to the occipital cortex, and that's the optic nerve. 2 optic nerves go right back to the visual cortex, the occipital cortex, and then from there information goes forward, and it will go to the top, to the parietal lobes. Now the parietal lobes is also a visual area, but it handles different aspects of vision. It kind of handles the spatial awareness, and it's where all the information from all the senses comes in through the body into a particular part of the inner brain called the thalamus, which is like the relay station, and it from the thalamus it's sent to the parietal lobes and other parts, and in the parietal lobes is all the spatial awareness and information about all the senses, and the parietal lobes handles really being able to navigate through space and making sense of a visual scene. So when I talk about children having problems making sense of a cluttered and busy environment, it's because there's something going wrong up here in the parietal lobes. And incidentally, and I'll talk about this another time, information flows from the occipital cortex to the parietal lobes, and that's given a name. That's called the dorsal stream. I won't say anything about that now, but that's just what it's called. Now, on the sides, okay, you've got the frontal lobes, you've got the occipital, you've got the parietal, and on the sides you've got the temporal lobes. Now the temporal lobes handle, well, they're kind of like the store, the memory store. As I've said before, the fusiform gyrus is there, and that handles faces and expressions, but you've also got all the information stored that you've ever learnt in your temporal lobes. Places, routes, books, words, number, everything. It's all there in your temporal lobes. So you can see that there are similarities with a computer, but the way it's handled and the way it's dealt with is completely different. So finally, moving forward, we come to the front. The front. Now there's the, as I say, the frontal lobes, which contains the motor cortex as well. That's where you kind of control your hands and your legs. But the very front is called the prefrontal cortex, and that's where you actually make decisions. That's where you plan. That's where it's also where you kind of feel things, where you control your feelings, inhibitions, and so on. There have been sort of famous cases of people in the past who've had damage to the frontal lobes, and it's completely affected their personality. Beginning of the 20th century, they used to perform operations on the frontal lobes. They would basically disconnect parts of the prefrontal cortex, and they found that the patients, when they had this operation, their personality changed completely. Very often they lost their inhibitions and so on. So that houses our personality. So they're the four lobes. Okay, we'll say bye-bye to head now, and I hope you've enjoyed today's session, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Don't forget to make any comments or ask questions down below, and let me know if there's anything in particular you want to learn about, and I will put it on the agenda. Okay, bye-bye now.